Treefort Music Fest is back. That means over 400 artists are taking over downtown Boise, Idaho for nearly a week starting March 26th through the 30th. Headliners include Sophie Tucker, Remy Wolf, Shaky Graves, Bright Eyes, Amel and the Sniffers, and so much more. 5-day GA passes start at $366, and you'll want to grab them now because prices are going up on March 1st. There's also single day or main stage only passes and a bunch of other combinations and packages, including hotel and fort badges, which can all be found at treefortmusicfest.com/tickets. That's treefortmusicfest.com/tickets. Today on CityCast Portland, we're talking about suggested changes to the Police Accountability Board that's causing tension at City Hall, the Multnomah County's massive homeless service budget shortfall that's sending shockwaves through local and state government, and the train heists targeting Nike sneakers. Joining me on this week's Friday News Roundup are KBOO News Director Althea Billings and our very own executive producer, John Notarianni. It's Friday, February 28th. I'm Claudia Meza, and this is what Portland's talking about. Welcome, everyone, to the Friday News Roundup. Althea and John, thank you for hanging out with me this morning.
Hello.
Hello.
For those of you new to the show, today is the day we break down some of the biggest local stories of the week with some of the best and brightest journalists in town. But before we jump into the news, I usually ask an opening question so our listeners can get to know our guests a little better. And today's opening question is actually related to Wednesday's episode where we talked about some of the best bakeries in Portland with chef and author Sonia Sanford. She gave us all her favorite bakeries in town, including who makes the best bread, sandwiches, and sweet treats, all that stuff. Which leads me to the opening question. If you were to open a bakery in town, what would you name it? And what kind of baked goods would you specialize in?
Okay, here, I've got a very stupid one that I just had off the top of my mind. So, this is going to be the third mention in a week on this show. I guarantee we are not paid advertisers, but I recently went to Jinju Patisserie and had one of their scones, which was like the best scone I've ever had in my life. So what I would do is do a bakery that specializes in scones, but it's a drive-through bakery where it's just like a window and you like pop in and get a scone that you can eat in your car, and I'll call it Scone Alone.
I like that.
I love that was the first thought in your head. And you're like, oh, it's probably really silly. Let me tell you about this perfect pun I just came up with.
And I was trying to come up with a pun that didn't involve buns. So that's where that was my thought process.
Ridiculous.
I think if you did go the pun route, maybe you could acknowledge it in the title. Like, this is the no pun bun zone. And if somebody comes in and makes a pun, it costs them double.
That's a good business model. I like that.
The one that came to mind, sometimes I have this thing where I discover something that's very obvious and that everybody else already knows. For example, Danishes are so good. I love those things.
Oh, yeah. Underrated, too.
Yeah, totally. So maybe mine would be called Not Danish because I'd want to riff on it and just put everything on a little cheesy kind of custardy thing wrapped in, the puff pastry, the goodness.
Mm. You call it Not Danish?
Not Danish because, I don't want to disrespect Danish culture. I'm open to the possibilities if you guys have a better Danish pun.
Nice. So I'm not really into my heritage's baked goods, but I still go back and I still buy random things because what I really do love are like the flavors and the ingredients they use because they're very Mexican and I like that. So what I would want to open up is a Mexican fusion bakery where we lean more on like classical French baking techniques, but base it all on Mexican flavors and ingredients and just that style of baked goods. And I would call it en français, which means in French, in Spanish, and just do really cool things. Because I don't know, most people don't know, but France tried to capture Mexico, but they only had like 6 years, sort of. They put in like some dude from Austria as the this is your new emperor. And that guy got beheaded. His name's Maximilian. It's too bad because I think people liked him otherwise. Yeah. Because he liked beer and brought polka. It's a whole thing. Mexico's complicated. But anyhow, for 6 years that they were sort of trying to be our emperor, we were just like, oh, like this? Is this what your guys are making? Like this? And it was a very different style of French Mexican baked goods. Not quite like Vietnam, which I think nailed it. So I'm not saying I want France to come back. I'm just saying maybe we should just like forgive, forget, and like actually make a fucking croissant, you know?
I love that, like, me and Althea were just thinking of, like, pithy plays on words, and you have an entire strategy to, like, revolutionize Mexican baking and, like, earn yourself a James Beard Award.
We need to be laminating the dough. It needs to be resting in the fridge. We're taking it back out.
Free idea if any local Mexican restaurateur like wants to take it. I'm never going to do this.
All right, I'm just making cannolis. That's it.
You know what, though? If you actually dedicated yourself to making some, like, amazing cannolis in Portland, no one's really doing it.
It could also be drive-through. It could be cannoli to goalie.
Fucking
Wow.
Claudia, please get us to the news.
All right, John, I love that you're like, oh, I can be true to my heritage. Cannoli. Okay, so
I can
Althea,
be true to my heritage of a drive-through.
thank you both for your answers. On to the news of the week. Althea, what are you looking at this week?
I am looking at the Portland City Council continuation of trying to install the Community Police Oversight Board. This is something that has been in the works for a long time, right? It was passed by voters 82% in 2020, and there's been this long process of trying to basically replace the police accountability system in our city. And Councillor Samir Kanal has taken up the issue. He was actually the project manager for the Police Accountability Commission that was designing all of these things, and they worked for like 3 years on it, and they came up with all of these like very detailed recommendations. They did a ton of work with the community. And so he was actually, before being on council, he was working as a city liaison for them. And the previous council in 2023 made some changes to their recommendations that a lot of police accountability advocates found to be difficult. Their original recommendation, right, was to have this 33-member board that would be able to like investigate actual accusations of police misconduct and impose penalties on officers who they find to have had wrongdoing. But the last council changed those so that they don't really have that same kind of authority. They scaled down the body to 21 members and gave that power of discipline to the police chief. And Kanal's not trying to like overhaul all of that stuff that already happened, but he has proposed making 2 tweaks to this system as it's sort of getting into motion, and it does have to happen this year. So it has to do with the nominating committee. So the committee of people who nominate the people to be on the committee, which is confusing. But he wants to expand that from 4 people to 5 to make sure that there's someone from every district, and expand this definition, this sort of limiting definition of who can be on the nominating committee, which right now says that they can't have like a bias for or against law enforcement. So he's introduced a potential resolution to try to expand on that definition. And it was sort of contentious in the Public Safety Committee earlier this week.
I find this whole question of bias and like how we determine bias and like how that influences decisions to be really interesting, right? Because like, as I understand, is it true that already current and former law enforcement officers and their immediate families are not eligible to be a member of this oversight board? Is that correct?
They're not eligible to be on the oversight board, but that doesn't touch the nominating committee. So that's sort of something that wasn't in the language necessarily that voters passed. And so that was where some of the most sweeping changes were made by the previous council.
All I'm hearing is that Kanal is seeking clarity on who is to join this new community police oversight board. And I'm just wondering, why is clarity so threatening to the Portland Police Association? Because they were very upset. Like, did you say the quote? Althea, I didn't quite hear it.
I pulled, there's a bunch of great quotes. Sophie Peel did some great reporting on this.
Yeah, because that quote of Aaron Schmautz,
Well, which one?
the Portland Police Association union president, this was the quote, is, "Portlanders voted for a new form of government for better representation and outcomes. We are facing a budget an economy crisis. Portlanders are demanding public safety be the focus, and yet Councillor Kanal's focus is redefining bias and a collectively bargained policy to ensure he can unfairly punish cops." And it's just like, that's not what I'm hearing. I'm just hearing, I'm just like reading the words, because the bias is for or against cops. It's not
Yeah.
like police. It's not, do you hate the police? It's like, are you also like super into the police? And so he's just like, couldn't we just define what this means? Also, good luck not finding bias for or against law enforcement.
It is hard to find somebody who doesn't have a opinion about police.
Yeah, like severed from like historical knowledge of our police force and have thoughts on them. Like, what do they want? Like an innie? You know what I mean? Severance. Thursdays.
Birving. Everyone's talking about birving.
Apple.
My understanding of this is it's a shift from like the demonstration of bias, which could be a tweet that you wrote 10 years ago, to an objective demonstration of the state of mind that prevents people from making impartial decisions, which sort of cuts out that, like, I had a dumb tweet 10 years ago, but creates this other standard that feels equally sort of like mushy and hard to wrap your head around.
Oh, you're talking about Canal's definition? Because, yeah, objective demonstration of bias is the existence of state of mind on the part of the... Yeah, that didn't make any sense to me either.
Yeah.
So neither of those things. But to me, I'm just like, is he just seeking clarity? And at this point, should someone in the council go, hey, Canal, do you mean like this? And like a better...
Maybe it could be retooled a little bit, but it does leave room for the fact in this definition that he's proposed that a reasonable person would have to determine that there's bias and that the person who's on the board or who's trying to be on the oversight board can't put that aside when assessing evidence in these types of cases, right? So it does expand it a little bit. So, right, like John's saying, if you tweeted defund the police in 2020, that like you would be totally outside of this. I would love to bring in some other interesting quotes from this follow-up article that Sophie Peel did. Mm-hmm. Also from Aaron Schmautz from the Portland Police Association. So his argument is that this is unnecessary. Don't do this. Don't change this. He says, quote, "This is evidence that we're breaking a system that works."
You mean the Oversight Review Board that was approved in 2020 that has been in perpetual delays for years and does still not exist?
Yeah, that's not working.
Yeah. But also in the committee earlier this week, counselors Eric Zimmerman and Loretta Smith kind of came at Canal hard about trying to make these changes. Zimmerman said it felt as if, quote, "staff who had a biased perspective, who are upset the previous council and their decision to make the nominating committee less biased and more nimble to try once again to change their plan back into what the staff wanted and didn't get their way with last year." Clearly in reference to Canal. If I was Canal, I would probably find that pretty inflammatory. And also it doesn't make sense. Like, part of his whole story about being elected is related, like he campaigned on this issue. This is part of why people elected him, is because he wanted to be able to right what he saw as a wrong from the police oversight board.
I read a lot of overreactions where I'm like, am I missing something? Because like back to the Portland Police Association president, in a statement to Willamette Week, he said, Canal in this resolution made his anti-union, anti-public safety bias clear. How? Everyone's being so dramatic. Everyone calm down right now.
Oh my gosh.
He said that it language that encourages additional bias. This like clarifying statement that Canal wants to add.
It just makes no sense. But also, like, to me, I'm like, Canal isn't even saying, hey, can this board punish or penalize? Which was the thing that to me was the teeth of the board. He's not even like, can we put these like dentures in? No, right now, it's the chief of police. What happens is this board gets together, suggests plans of action, gives it to the freaking chief of police, and what's stopping the chief of police from going, cool, bye?
Yeah.
That's the real issue. Why is everyone arguing about bias? And how is like, again, I feel like I'm missing a page. Whenever these arguments happen, I'm like, are we missing something?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I also read into it some of just like the confusion of how this council is going to operate and like the hammering out some of that in real time, right? So Canal sort of like brought this to like a committee, and it seems like he doesn't have the votes on the committee to get this through. But then Steve Novick popped up and was like, hey, if you want to like not have it go through the committee, you can just get 3 votes on city council and take it to the full city council and we can do it there. And then Zimmerman was like, what the fuck? Like, what's the point of the committee if we can just go around it when like the committee doesn't like it? And I'm wondering if that's going to be a model that we're going to see more frequently. If like there's internal debates on these committees that are the work groups that are supposed to really hammer out some of these issues, maybe they're just going to go in the other direction and throw it to the full city council, which could be a real clusterfuck.
I mean, I wanted to add one other quote from this article about what Loretta Smith was saying, because, right, if they were to pass this resolution to change this, to clarify what bias means, it would have to go back to bargaining with the police union, and the police union could reject it, right? She said, quote, "All it's going to do is go back to the union and they're going to say they don't want it. So why are you wasting the council's time? If it was just to have this conversation again and put people on record, that to me is not a good use of our time."
Yeah.
My thing about that is this is the place where you're supposed to talk about it. And as an observer, there's been a few times that I've seen that Loretta Smith is sort of quick to shut down conversations or shut down the council's ability to make change, which is very, very strange to me. Anyway, this is like stymied at the moment. It's Novick, Murillo, Zimmerman, and Smith on the committee with Canal. So I think Novick would be like the vote that would need to be won over to send this to council, because it sounds pretty clearly like Zimmerman and Smith are against it.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Althea, for looking into this. I think it's the first TIFF. It's the first TIFF of the season, you guys.
They were all holding hands and heating things up in the microwave together for too long.
All right. Well, let's take a quick break here. When we come back, more headlines of the week.
Hey, Fidelity. What's it cost to invest with the Fidelity app?
Start with as little as $1 with no account fees or trade commissions on U.S. stocks and ETFs.
That's music to my ears.
I can only talk.
Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Zero account fees apply to retail brokerage accounts only. Sell order assessment fee not included. A limited number of ETFs are subject to a transaction-based service fee of $100. See full list at fidelity.com/commissions. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC, member NYSE, SIPC.
So my story this week is about how the county is bumming everyone out. Poor county. I sincerely want a win for them. Like, the people who work for the county, like all the service providers, are so overworked and underfunded, strangely. And I just want to shout them out and like heavily outline that this headline and the ensuing conversation is specifically about their organization's budget shortfall and how elected officials are responding to it, not the county workers' continued service and dedication. I relied on reporting by OPB's Alex Zielinski, Coin6, KGW, and Willamette Week's Anthony Effinger, along with an update from the Oregonian. So if you hadn't heard, last Friday afternoon, Multnomah County Chair Jessica Vega Peterson, aka JVP, held a press conference raising the alarm that the county's Homeless Service Department, formerly known as the Joint Office of Homeless Services, was facing and this is a quote here, catastrophic budget shortfall, $104 million to be exact.
Yeah.
And JVP warned that if the county doesn't receive financial assistance by their new fiscal year in July, they're pretty much just like, well, a lot of stuff is going to be shut down. And it's the department that most of Portland right now is relying on to come through with promises. So the shortfall was partially blamed on the shrinking funding from Metro, who oversees the regional supportive housing service tax, which is where Multnomah County is getting a big chunk of this money. According to the Homeless Service Department Director Dan Field, the majority of this budget shortfall comes from the fact that the county relied on about $80 million in temporary funding streams to run ongoing permanent programs. So this now feels like something that could have been caught a little earlier on, but it's also an issue that the city has been also having, which is where their budget shortfall is also coming through. Same with the state. It's just they've used temporary funds to fund permanent things, and now the city and we as citizens are relying on. So to cover this gap, JVP has requested an additional $55 million from the state and $30 from Metro, the regional government. She's also inferred that she might be asking neighboring counties to also chip in. So like Clackamas, Washington.
Yeah.
And pretty much every regional and state elected leader has expressed feeling blindsided by this troubling county budget news. And many did not mince words when asked for comment. So before I jump into all that, including some choice words from Governor Kotek, let me share just some KGW8 reporting on what homeless county services are facing the chopping block. I think it's important to just call their stuff out.
Yeah.
Most of us see the county working in silence, and we don't know like all the things that they're actually doing. What will be gone if they don't get this additional funding is 2 adult congregate shelters totaling 230 beds will close by the end of the year. Plans would also be canceled for some future shelters, including a 65-unit adult shelter. County funding would cease for some day centers, and all of this is notable because our mayor's plan to end unsheltered homelessness relies so heavy on overnight shelter beds being available and day centers being funded. Now, the county would also stop paying for about 200 unassigned permanent supportive housing units. Other cuts include shutting down a mobile health program that provides hygiene to people living outside, navigation teams that help people access service, community law attorneys who help remove barriers so people can access permanent housing, eviction mitigation programs, including a printed booklet that homeless residents use to like figure out where to go, phone numbers. They would also be canceling all employment programs impacting hundreds of people who rely on the county for job placements and rent assistance. However, Jessica Vega Peterson clarified that this budget shortfall is not expected to impact the Multnomah County Sobering Center, which remains in development because that funding comes from a different source. Again, this is just, it's important to understand the scope of what might be cut. So before I go on sharing thoughts from some very upset local and state leaders, who, by the way, spoiler alert, they're all blaming JVP. What do you guys think?
My take is yikes. Yikes, dude. And like you were saying, Claudia, I feel I want to win for the county, for the Homeless Services Department, nay, joint office. I want it for them. I want them to be able to celebrate something.
Yeah.
But it's like bad audit this year, not doing things right this year, not spending enough money, spent too much money, didn't do all of these things.
Yeah. So Willamette Week quoted Julia Brim Edwards, who is a Multnomah board commissioner. And she candidly shared that she and other commissioners got news of the shortfall just an hour before the Friday's news conference. So they were just like, what? Also, the neighboring counties are very concerned because they kind of have a feeling like, again, Metro gives all the neighboring counties, including Multnomah, money for their homeless services. And again, the difference between the county and the city is that more people rely on the county because they provide these services.
Yeah.
So if the city is already facing a shortfall and the county, who's supposed to be like, we got this, right? Because they have multiple funding sources, are just like, no, we don't got this. Now the city is also double fucked.
Yeah, because a lot of what Wilson is planning to spend is going to sort of come through this funding stream that they're now saying, ruh-roh, don't know where the money is.
Yeah.
So just real quick, OPB checked in with Clackamas Commissioner Ben West, and he basically was like, the first inescapable fact is that Multnomah County has failed dismally, both in comparison to other counties and most importantly, on an absolute scale. He basically called for an independent audit of Multnomah County's budget, and he also said it would be insulting to ask Clackamas County taxpayers to bridge this financial gap without explanation. Yeah. And that's the thing, is no one really has one. And that's why people are upset. So both Lynn Peterson, the Metro regional president, and Kotek, our governor, balked at the request. This is the quote that Kotek wrote. I don't think it's appropriate to come out of the gate and ask for an amount of money without previous conversations, which basically says, like, I had no clue what was coming. Now you're telling us basically like, we're fucked. More money, please. And they're just like, what happened to all the freaking money? You had so much money. You weren't even spending it. Where did that go? And then Metro Chair Lynn Peterson was quoted as saying, Chair Vega Peterson's actions on Friday highlight the trust issues the electorate has with the government in general. We can't keep telling the voters of the region we can do big things and then let them down. So just know that it was a lot of browbeating. And Mayor Wilson, our new mayor, who's very positive, by the way, cheery guy, was just like, I was caught flat-footed, which I think is like his way of being like, what the fuck?
He famously hates cursing.
Yeah.
He does. And so that was him being like, he just wanted to use one F word in there. He's like, flat-footed.
That's the CityCast Portland interpretation. He didn't actually say the curse word at the meeting. I mean, and I'll add to that, there was a discussion at City Council, I believe Wednesday night, and Mitch Green came out saying that the county's homeless services department should look at other cuts, specifically in terms of administration, management, and executive salaries. He said, quote, "We shouldn't be closing beds. We should be trimming our administrative bloat." Which
Exactly.
if the city council is having their first little like lovers quarrel right now, the county and like everyone else is in a relationship where they've been like gritting their teeth at each other for years. And they're just like, there's so much resentment built up.
Yeah.
They're about to be throwing the mattress in the road.
Yeah.
So what's even more messed up is that JVP is expected to submit her budget recommendations like this April, but she's already kind of rang the alarm being like, this is fucked. So what I'm saying is that there's a possibility it could be more fucked.
Yeah. Yeah.
In their defense, a spokesperson for Multnomah County was just like, we told Lynn Peterson, we've been in contact with her for a few days about this. So I don't understand why she's saying like she's all surprised, you know, because there was a lot of like quoting of her being like, what? And they were just like, you knew. You know? But also, just know that JVP's current term as county chair ends on January 4th, 2027.
Yeah.
That's all.
I mean, you know, the county chair can't make the money exist, obviously,
But they're supposed to manage the money.
But like you also aren't supposed to have $100 million surprise. That's not a good oops.
Yeah. What amount of $1 million shortfall do you feel like is an okay amount? To have? 5
to
okay.
10.
5
to 10.
I'd love to get that
I'm
on
not joking.
record.
5 to 10. You're just like, oh, 100. But again, the city had a very similar shortfall.
Yeah.
And they're figuring it out.
But the city, we did have sort of like progressive updates in the months leading up to it.
Oh, we were all
that this
like
was
we
coming.
were fucked. Yeah.
Yeah, it didn't go from 0 to 100.
Right. Well, and the other thing, I mean, part of the rhetoric from Peterson and from Kotek is that the success or failure of homeless services in Multnomah County reflects on them to the voters as well. Like, this is a project of dealing with homelessness in Oregon that Kotek has called out as like one of her big priorities. And this is like a yardstick that they're being measured by. I hear what the statement was about Peterson being like that she was in the loop at least that week, but I feel like you got to process it emotionally a little bit. And I would want to know when you know that, hey guys, so you know how I was paying the bills? We're going broke. Any thoughts?
Yeah.
Yeah. I know it's not possible, but if the city auditor wants to audit the county, go for it. You have my permission.
Well, there's a county auditor too.
Where are they? Okay.
Jennifer, call in.
So let's take another break here. And when we come back, more headlines of the week. All right, John, what do you have for us?
I've got a story of daring do and high-pressure crimes from reporting by the Los Angeles Times with a little bit of support from the Wall Street Journal. There's been a string of at least 10 daring railroad heists that have happened in California, in Arizona, in rural areas over the last year or so. And the target has been Nike shoes. So over the course of like the last year, there's been about $2 million worth of Nikes stolen off of trains in the desert. They're saying that this has been a coordinated effort and it's been happening again and again. In November, $41,000 worth of shoes stolen in Arizona. In January, nearly $500,000 worth of Nike shoes were stolen off of a train. And these thieves are getting on the trains, screwing with the air brakes to make them stop, and then stealing these sneakers. Law enforcement has been on it. Some major players have been arrested, but there's still Nike sneaker bandits at large.
I want to know if they're on horses. That is like the only thing I want to know about. Because to be honest, like if you're going to take the trouble to do all this for a pair of Nikes, part of me is just like, all right, that's a lot of work. You could have gotten a job to pay for that.
Yeah.
Because that's a lot of coordinating. That's a lot of like stunt work to do all this.
There's an entrepreneurial spirit there.
Yeah.
Yeah. At a certain point, I'm just like, you could do much bigger things here. But if they were on horses, then it's a lifestyle, John. And at a certain point, I'm just like, they're bandits. That's their heritage.
I mean, I think that the modern horse is the white paneled van, which is what they're using. So they ride on the train, they throw the shoes off the train, and then a van comes by and swoops them up and drives off into the desert with the shoes.
No longer enamored by this tale.
I had a similar reaction. There's sort of a romantic idea in my head of like a train heist and everything that would go into planning it. But then also sort of the reality of fishing a box of sneakers out of the bushes and like running back to a white van.
Yeah.
Which is like apparently part of it.
The other thing that makes this a little bit less romantic is that officials think the final end is that they end up getting sold on eBay. So not quite as romantic as like some of the Old West imagery that you might think. Yeah.
Yeah, like a bank vault.
I want to be in that meeting where these ding-dongs were just like, you know how everyone is hitting up retail stores? So check this out. Trains. And I think I kind of get it because I know that Nike pulled back from retail stores. So the only way you can get them is like at their warehouses now or like very specific Nike stores, which is why they're losing the market because no one can find them unless they're in a white paneled van chasing a train.
Yeah. I mean, the Nike thefts are getting the headline, but it's a bigger problem than I realized. The estimate is that there's 65,000 railroad cargo thefts each year for about $100 million worth of goods. So these Nike thefts are just like a very small part of that. And the railroads, on their part, they say they've been investing millions of dollars in trying to prevent this. But like there's 140,000 miles of rail track in America. So like it's actually kind of a brilliant crime. It's like to steal something in the middle of nowhere where like the person driving the train could be a mile away because they're so big. They're actually not even categorized as robberies. They're categorized as burglaries because they don't even run into another person when they're doing it.
That's such a long train. That was another one of my big takeaways is like that you could be burgled from 2 miles down the road. Like, you know, I experience a long train every now and again getting stuck behind one in Portland, but
you should just jump on and see if you can score some sneakers.
Yeah,
Althea.
I guess there's opportunity there. I've just been sitting. I could get in there and see what you guys have. I also like the sort of attitude of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Do I need to learn how to code to hack to do cybercrime? No. I need to hop on a slow-moving train and throw Nike dunks off the back.
Well, I mean, for Nike's part, $2 million worth of lost product isn't great, but Nike is actually doing fine right now. Their stock is up 5% this week. And the Wall Street Journal has reported that, you know, Claudia, you mentioned that they'd been losing market share, that they'd been in sort of a rough spot. Well, they hired a new CEO last year, and analysts are saying that they're optimistic about the turnaround. So our good friends at the upstart Nike, people are saying they're going to be okay, despite all these railroad crimes.
So they basically are expecting good things. They hired a new CEO, not because they're seeing big changes, is what I'm hearing. Because when you said that, I was like, did the CEO's mom buy all the Nikes? Like, what is stock?
Well,
did someone's rich mom come in and just buy hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of boxes of Nike?
Well, I mean, they're doing stuff. They're doubling down on like their wholesale operation is what they said. Also, this week, Nike announced a new partnership, Nike Skims, with Skims, the company founded by Kim Kardashian.
Oh, man. See, I don't think they're attaching their star to the right coattail is what I'm saying at this moment. Like the Kardashian stock is going down.
They're very excited about it. They say it's the first time that Nike has joined with an outside company to do a new brand. So hopes are high on the new Nike Kim Kardashian line.
The moment you said that, I was like, oh, things are not going to go well for them. Well, you guys, thank you so much for hanging out with me, Althea, John. This was pleasant.
It was fine.
Yes, we hit the bare minimum. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it was fine.
No, this was great. Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you to everyone listening. I hope everyone has a great weekend. That's all for today here on CityCast Portland. Thank you so much for listening. Our podcast production team this week were John Notarianni, Julia Fiaioni, Francisco Kilgore, and Selena C.A. Reynolds. Our Hey Portland newsletter editor is Rachel Monahan, and our host is me, Claudia Meza. Original music by Jenny Conley and Stephen Drizos. Additional music by Epidemic Sound and All the Kimonos. We'll be back Monday morning with more from around the city. Until then, see you at Slim's.